In this Michelle Thomas review, we're going to go over the 4 things that you need to know about and consider before potentially making a Michelle Thomas purchase. First, I'm going to explain what the experience is like doing the course from the student perspective. Second, I'm going to give you a little bit of a history as to why the courses were built like they are. Third, I'll give you a summary of the content found in the different levels of the Michelle Thomas courses. Fourth, I'm going to tell you about the big things the courses don't have. So this is less of my personal Michelle Thomas review and more of an overview of the Michelle Thomas methods as somebody who's done them. That's because at the end of this video, you're going to have enough information to make a good choice for yourself, regardless to what any stranger on YouTube thinks. I know a lot about the Michelle Thomas courses because I've started 6 of them. I'm actively doing 1 of them and I've completed another 3. But I also know why they haven't worked for some of my friends. I know how super exciting language learning can be, so we're just going to jump right in. First, let's look at what Michelle Thomas looks like from the student perspective. You can buy the Michelle Thomas courses in various places. You can buy the physical CDs on the Michelle Thomas website or on Amazon. You can download the files to your iTunes store. You can download some of the levels, but not all of them, through Audible. And there's also a Michelle Thomas app where you can make in-app purchases. No matter where you buy it, you'll notice that in any case, the course is a bunch of audio files. The basics is that you start the audio and you're sitting in a way with Michelle and 2 students. The idea is that as he's teaching those students parts of the language, you become the 3rd student in the class. So when he asks them a question, you just pause the audio, think a little bit, give your answer, and then hit play again to see how the rest of the class goes. Just like Michelle said at the beginning of the course, there's no homework, there's no memorizing, there's no drills, there's no writing. You're just kind of hanging out in this invisible classroom. It's really low tech, and you can actually hear the errors the students make in the course, which is different from other audio courses. And with that, Michelle's corrections to his students, his kind of reprimands, his enthusiasm is all there too. There's also little hints and little clues and a lot of explanations, so it really kind of is an authentic experience, just one that you're beaming into from the future. So now I'm going to play a little bit of Michelle Thomas on my computer so you can kind of see what it would be like if I was doing it in my room, although personally I do these while walking around.
Yes, so it is ready.
So I'm going to pause that and see. I just jumped in. C'est fini?
C'est prêt.
Ah,
C'est prêt.
ça marche.
It is starting now.
Ça commence maintenant.
Ça commence maintenant. Ça commence maintenant. Everybody is starting.
Tout le monde commence.
Tout le monde commence. Tout le monde commence. Tout le monde commence. My friend is starting.
Mon ami commence.
Mon ami commence.
Passe-moi.
Mon ami commence.
Mon ami commence.
Now I know that doesn't look very exciting, but it actually gives your brain a real workout. I found that if I'm actually sitting in one place, I'm secretly lazy, so my brain just kind of drifts. I normally do it when I'm just walking around my neighborhood spaced out, but I've also previously done it while commuting. So like, is it good? That depends. Overall, if you like an interactive teaching method, I think you will like this course. If you're a person who has auditory processing problems or is hard of hearing, this course is definitely not for you. And it's interesting because I've always been a very visual learner, but it turns out with languages that all sorts of audio courses have been super helpful for me, even if you generally don't think that you're an auditory learner. Now, out of all of the courses in the Michelle Thomas series, Michel, the man himself, teaches French, Spanish, Italian, and German. The rest are taught using the same methods, but by various other teachers, some who were trained by him and some who were trained by the publisher. I will say in those 4 courses, which I have done with him, I found them a little bit more fun and magical for some reason than, for example, Portuguese or Polish, which I haven't found quite as captivating, but I did still like. Now, before we get to the next section of this video is also part of a larger series about my most favorite and most despised language tools. After this video is over, feel free to head over to that playlist and see some other reviews, especially right now, if you're kind of thinking what might be next for you for language learning. Now let's get into the second part of this review, which is the educational theory of how the Michel Thomas courses work. So who was Michel Thomas, a teacher? Yes and no. And it kind of explains why this course is a little hard to have faith in. The spark notes is that Michel Thomas was a Polish-born Jew who then grew up in Germany and ended up moving to France right before the Second World War. Spoke a bunch of languages, fought in the war, ended up eventually moving to LA. In LA, he started teaching languages and ended up with a whole bunch of famous clients. He was outside of the academic sphere, so he was super secretive about his methods. That's why you can't find anything really concrete about it online. So then how does it work? How do we know it works? So I'm going to pull this apart a little bit and explain the theory as to why walking around your neighborhood mumbling German to yourself like a crazy person might actually work. First, there's this big no stress approach, which he really pushes at the beginning of the course. We now know that if you are stressed, learning is very hard, maybe impossible. In fact, if you've ever taken a public school language course, you probably already know that. It's actual neuroscience now. The second thing he does is chunking. The course is breaking down all these very big complicated grammar rules into these little itty bitty parts, so you can take in the parts one after another and kind of build sentences using these parts like little blocks. So in the audio, you might hear Michel Thomas say something like, I drink in Spanish is bebo, and water is agua. So how do you say, I drink water? Bebo agua. And you drink is bebes. So how do you say you drink water? Bebes agua. I like chunking a lot. And soon, with all these little pieces, you'll be putting together these big fat sentences. The sentences will look complicated, but to you, they won't really feel complicated. And the third little technique that he uses is called active recall. The biggest critique against Michel Thomas by any language teacher is always, it's just translation. Yes and no. Remember, you're just a beginner in this language. Usually teachers who critique translation think that you should go into immersion directly. And while there is reasons to believe that immersion is very helpful, at this beginner stage, it can be super stressful. And what do we know about stress? You can't learn when you're stressed. So he's speaking to you in English, and what you're gonna do is kind of actively pull out these language words. And yeah, it's not in the context of that language, which ideally you'll soon move to. But just that process of pulling those words out over and over again with no word bank is way more helpful than most apps. That's because in real life, you don't have clues. You don't have a word bank you can pull stuff from, and you have to be able to think kind of quickly. So pulling up that language without those clues, without that word banks is really critical, and we call that active recall. Basically, if you're just getting good at a language with one app, what you're really doing is getting good at a language with one app. You're getting good at that app. And I've seen this a lot of times. When you go to transfer that language over and those skills over into the real world, transference doesn't really work that way. If you want to Google more about transference, feel free. But it's kind of a myth. Doesn't work. And at this point, I'll mention, if you know somebody who's struggling to learn a language with an app, send them over to that playlist I mentioned. I have a lot of great resources that are scientifically based, that aren't just fun and games. Now, the last piece of pedagogy I want to get into, the fourth piece, is spaced repetition, my favorite thing. Once you get your little lesson in I drink, you drink, you're going to know that pretty well. But if you just hear that once, what are the odds that you're going to remember that in a year? Sure, in a few minutes you might still remember it, but in 2 years? The idea behind spaced repetition is that you keep going back to something, but those spaces in which you keep going back to it become larger and larger. So after you get your little I drink, you drink, then you do something else and then come back to it. And then you'll keep going and then you'll come back to it. And then quite a while will pass and you'll come back to it. And then finally a whole lot of time will pass and you'll come back to it. Spaced repetition is awesome, and a lot of different apps and study techniques rely on it. Basically, the longer you put in between this retrieval, the better you'll get at being able to retrieve it much farther in the future. So what can we summarize about the Michel Thomas pedagogy? First of all, it's secretive. While this class is happening, you're not going to have any explanation of how it's working. But I promise, even though it just feels easy breezy, there is good stuff happening. Now let's go back to the third part of my Michel Thomas review, which is what the courses actually contain, what they actually teach you. This can be a little tricky because it does depend on the language as well as where you buy the course. On most platforms, you're going to start with the Michel Thomas beginner courses. Generally, these courses bring you through most of the present tense, I go, you go. Some of them will also give you other tenses such as I would go or I will go. And especially in the Latin and Germanic languages, you'll also get a sizable working vocabulary right off the bat. In French, Spanish, Italian, you'll learn practical things like I would like to make a reservation. In the Germanic languages, which have a little less in common with English, although English is a Germanic language, it'll be a little bit less practical, but still very helpful. You'll learn beginner stuff like, can you come with me? Or I will give it to you tomorrow. Now, if you know anything about language learning already, you'll know that learning things like, I would go tomorrow, but I will be busy, is really actually a pretty complicated sentence for like your first 3 weeks of language learning. And that's because the beginner course really just gives you a lot of really, really good information, and I personally love it as a beginner course. We'll get to what it doesn't have soon though, so don't think this is an entirely positive review. I'll also mention that because you're still testing the waters, I would just start with buying the beginner courses because there are additional courses, but you don't know if you're going to like them yet, if you want to buy them. On Audible, you buy them in a bunch of little parts, and I would recommend just buying the first 2 or 3. On the other platforms, you'll just buy the whole big beginner one is a big chunk. And then on the other platforms, you also have 3 additional Michel Thomas courses in most of the languages. So we went over the beginner course. You also have the advanced course, the language builder course, and the vocabulary course. So if you're looking at it like on iTunes, you'll see 4 different files and each one has to be learned separately. If you're buying it on Audible, you'll probably see like 7 files or so, but they'll all just be for that beginner course. And then you'll have to move to a different platform to buy the other 3 if you want to. After the beginner course, the advanced course is the next one in the Michel Thomas series. In the advanced course, you'll go through a lot of additional verb tenses like, I would have come yesterday, but I didn't know. Or I had arrived early, but you weren't there. Not only is this super advanced, but you're gonna notice a pattern here, which is the Michel Thomas courses pretty much are about verbs. Now this can be great. I walked into my first French class ever, day 1, already being able to semi-communicate in the language while nobody else even knew a single color or number. So I got to skip the really boring, really basic French stuff and get put in a slightly higher level. However, with Spanish, which is before I understood the problems with this, I had learned so many verbs and I had been able to communicate in a way that seemed so smooth that my first day of ever speaking Spanish in Mexico, mind you, I had just finished crying because I couldn't understand anybody, they put me in the highest course they had offered because they assumed I already had all of this Spanish, when really, I was just good at verbs. I'll explain how this all happened to me in a moment. Now there are those 2 other courses, the language builder and the vocabulary courses, and they do aim to fill in the gaps of the beginner and advanced Michel Thomas courses. But personally, I don't like those 2. So far, you can probably tell that I am a fan of the beginner and advanced courses. I like just walking around and talking and knowing I'm gonna get it. But the other 2 courses are kind of in isolation. It's just a person speaking words, speaking phrases, and you saying them back. And it's not in that little pretend classroom, so you don't have a lot of feedback. You're not Lego blocking sentences together. You kind of are building on the original stuff you learned, but the 3rd and 4th courses in the sequence, the vocabulary and language builders, don't really do it for me. Okay, you're still talking, but should I buy it or not? Well, if you've never worked with the language before, or if verbs are your problem, I think this course will be really helpful for you. If you're just looking to build vocabulary or work on the finer points of your language, it's definitely not for you. Okay, now, final part of my Michel Thomas interview, what the courses are missing. Now, after we go through this section, there is a little bonus after it. Obviously, if you've sat through the video this far, you're invested in doing your homework, so I'm going to give you a few alternatives to the Michel Thomas courses or similar courses that you can use to supplement the Michel Thomas courses with. But now let's get back to what the Michel Thomas courses are missing. So like I said, I completed all of Michel Thomas in Spanish. I was so convinced I could speak Spanish perfectly because I got through the whole thing. And I went to Mexico and I cried. And I cried in a Walmart. And I cried in a restaurant. And I cried trying to talk to my Airbnb host. And I cried trying to talk to my Airbnb neighbor. I did a lot of crying, even though I had finished the Michel Thomas courses. The problem was that I could actually have a conversation, but I couldn't say things like, "Where's my bag?" Or "After school, I'm going home." "Oh yeah, that notebook, that's mine." But I could say things like, "Hi, I have a reservation for tonight. My name is, and it's for," or, "Oh, if I had known, I would have come earlier." But I was missing really important vocabulary like food and days of the week and times and basic stuff you need to know in order to communicate with people. Plus, I had no listening practice, so it just sounded like noise when people talked at me, even if I knew some of the words they were saying. So the Michel Thomas courses will help you appear fluent, and they'll give you a really good shot in the arm right off the bat. But if you actually want to be fluent, you have to supplement the course with other things. So no, this is not the one resource you will ever need. It comes with a hefty price tag because I think the value is really good, but you'll have to factor it in with other stuff in your language learning budget. So when I got to that Spanish class and they put me at the highest level, it's because I appeared like I had very good Spanish. But in reality, I couldn't keep up with the class and I couldn't participate because they had learned all of these pieces of vocabulary and prepositions and cultural references, which I just didn't have. Okay, so now we'll go on to the bonus. If you've liked this video so far, I do a lot of unbiased, unpaid for by some big corporation reviews of products I adore and despise in my playlists. And also, I'm still updating, so subscribe to the channel if you want to see more stuff, and in the comments feel free to leave the name of another product you want to review for. So like I said, this Michel Thomas review technically had 4 parts, but we're going to do the bonus now, which is similar products. One resource that I love because I'm a super fan of the philosophy is language transfer. Language transfer is another audio course. There are tons of audio courses out there in the world, but language transfer, I think, is different than Michel Thomas, but has some stuff in common, such as being in a classroom or using parts of words like building blocks. Also, language transfer is free because they're trying to democratize language education. Everybody's favorite thing. So what I've done for certain languages is I've used language transfer and Michel Thomas together, for example in German, and kind of gone between the two and just gotten a little bit deeper with the things I'm studying. And if you don't have the cash for Michel Thomas, like I said, language transfer is free. The courses are a little less steep, they're a little bit faster. I don't think they have quite the same quality as Michel Thomas, but if you're a student, if you're not living in America, so maybe you're not making dollars, it's a good alternative. Language transfer overlaps with some of the Michel Thomas languages, although Michel Thomas has some language transfer doesn't have, tongue twister. But language transfer also has Swahili and Turkish, which the Michel Thomas courses do not have. Another very similar product is the Say Something series. I have used the Say Something series in Welsh. It is different than Michel Thomas. It does go a little bit faster, but very similar neuroscience-y kind of learning techniques, and it's an audio course. Again, Say Something does overlap with some Michel Thomas languages, and Michel Thomas has a lot of languages that Say Something doesn't have. But Say Something has Welsh, Manx, and Cornish, as well as Latin, which Michel Thomas doesn't have, and are super cool languages. Finally, there are plenty of other audio courses that are quite different than Michel Thomas, the most famous one being Pimsleur. One day I may go back and do a Pimsleur versus Michel Thomas comparison, but generally Pimsleur works with phrases and Michel Thomas works more with the grammar. Pimsleur really drills it in. Michel Thomas kind of just goes about his business, assuming you figured it out, but does give you more explanations. Okay, now we're gonna do one more bonus because this is now less of a Michel Thomas review and more of a language coaching session. If you're thinking about doing any of these online courses, there's 5 ways that you can really get the most out of them. The first is you just gotta relax. All of the audio courses go into this at the beginning of them. If you're stressed out, if you're like, I'm not gonna remember this, if you have a lot going on, it's not gonna work. That's part of the reason I do it while I walk, because I do have a lot of stress in my life, like everybody does. So when I walk, I can kind of keep my body going, keep myself in the motions of doing the course, and it kind of just helps relax me. The second way to get the most out of an audio course is that if that day the audio course isn't working for you, just put it down. Now you can tell I love this course, and I love all audio courses. If I could just learn all of languages through audio courses, I would. But some days, my brain just isn't into it, even though learning languages is really fun for me. It's okay, it's not a race. And even if it was a race, trying to force information into your brain when you're not feeling it is just gonna frustrate you. It's not gonna move you ahead. You're just gonna have a hard time paying attention. So even if you're like, I need to relax, and you really can't, just don't. The third piece of advice is to limit yourself to 10 to 15 minute sessions with courses like Michel Thomas, Say Anything, and Language Transfer. With Pimsleur, they usually say 30 minutes, and I think you can get up to 30 minutes. But the bigger thing is, do it in these small chunks every single day. It'll be easier to relax, it'll be easier to pay attention, and they all function on spaced repetition. That assumes that there's going to be intervals, and those interviews are going to be a few minutes sometimes, and then a few days. And if you just cram them all into one, it's not going to stick long term. Fourth is that, unlike the other audio courses, Michel Thomas says, don't go back. You learned it once, have confidence, don't go back. But I, a person who cannot remember anything, needs to go back. That's okay, just don't feel guilty about it. As long as you understand about 80% of the questions and you're getting 80 to 90% right, that's good enough. You can keep going because you'll see too in the courses the students will have errors, and when you go back, you and the students will make errors, there'll be re-explanations, you'll get there eventually. It'll come together, have some faith in the process, just have faith in the process. And finally, my 5th big piece of advice for any audio course is supplement it with other material. Because the Michel Thomas courses are mostly spoken to in English, like all audio courses, you're not gonna have a lot of good listening practice. And if you remember my story of me crying in Mexico, it's because I didn't have any listening practice. Speaking and listening really are 2 different skills, even if they don't seem like they should be. Same for reading and writing. So my favorite thing to do when I'm starting a language is start with a Michel Thomas course or any audio course, but then also do things like watch YouTube videos with native speakers, listen to music, read short stories, or work with an exercise book, and use 2 or 3 different tools. So what languages do you want to study with Michel Thomas? Do you have any lingering questions? Answer those 2 questions in the comments below. Like I said, this is part of a larger series where I review all sorts of different language learning tools, but I don't necessarily know what will be the most helpful for everybody. So I'll come here, I'll check back, and I will continue doing new videos. Subscribe to see them, leave a comment to tell me what they should be about. And like I said, if you have a friend who's frustrated with an app or has been studying for a long time and hasn't really gotten anywhere, especially with speaking, send them this video. I think it's a great speaking exercise, and that way they can also see the playlist I have and find something that's not the one app everybody knows about.